Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. My name is Jillian Robinson. I am the associate producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre. And today I am joined by one of our co-artistic producers, Ryan Borochovitz, the incredible Ryan Borochovitz. How are you doing, Ryan?
Wow, what an intro. Hi, Jill. I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Today, Ryan and I have a very exciting episode. We are unpacking a wonderful piece happening right now in our city. It is Letter from Max, a Ritual, starring Maev Beaty as Sarah Ruhl and Jesse LaVercombe as Max Ritvo. And this is a Necessary Angel Theatre Company production happening at the Theatre Centre here in Toronto. And it is playing from November 10th to December 3rd, 2023. And it is directed by the wonderful Alan Dilworth. So before we dive too far into these two wonderful characters' conversations, let's do our usual icebreaker intro. So Ryan, what's in your cup today?
So in my cup, which is our, Cup of Hemlock cup with
Nice.
the logo and everything, I have coffee because we are filming this rather early the next morning after seeing the show. So need my cup of joe to put a spring in my step. How about you? What are you drinking?
I am also drinking the same type of coffee as Ryan, vanilla nut cream, I think is what it's called. And I'm drinking it from one of my favorite mugs. It's just a Marie from the Aristocats mug. She's my favorite Disney character. Ladies don't start fights, but they can finish them. Nice. And then I have some water as well. I'm feeling a little bit allergy-esque. It's sniffly season, I had someone say to me recently, which is, I'm feeling that this morning. So got water going. We've got coffee on board. We're ready to dive in.
Nice.
Yeah. So Ryan, before we kind of unpack, why don't you run us through a little synopsis of what this piece is all about?
Okay, Letters from Max, a Ritual, is adapted from a book. This book, to be exact, which is, I have it here. I've read it. I've been reading it very gradually for a little while now, and because I have various scholastic interests in the intersecting ideas and people and things that this concerns, but now with this show coming up, I sort of had been reading it very sporadically, just as like a pick it up, read a few letters at a time. It's nice, it's charming, but then kind of put it away as other reading demands called my attention away. But with the show coming up, I made a point of finished reading it before we saw the show. So this book by the famous American playwright, Sarah Ruhl, is a document of the letters exchanged between her and a former student of hers from a playwriting class that she taught at Yale in 2012. His name is Max Ritvo. And over the course of about 4 or 5 years or so, from 2012 to 2016, they exchanged many letters between each other. They very quickly ceased to be teacher-student and just became colleagues and friends and shared this beautiful, completely platonic but truly loving relationship with each other. And the big, I guess, kicker here is that Max was diagnosed with Ewing's sarcoma, I believe it's called. Sarcoma, yep. Sarcoma. Yeah, not a medical expert, but it's a type of pediatric cancer that he was diagnosed with when he was quite young and was constantly going back and forth between going through remission, going through chemo, having it kick up again over the course of this correspondence. So in addition to being the story of this friendship, it is also the story of this young poet dealing with mortality and having his very dear friend and former teacher talking him through these big ideas. It's so that's the book. Essentially, the play is Sarah Ruhl herself has taken the book, which is already taking a big swath of letters and kind of condensing it down into something slightly smaller, and really condensing it down even smaller into about a 2-hour play version, where we have just the two actors playing, both Sarah and Max, and it's a condensation of the letters you find in the book, but staged in this way that makes sense. Sarah Ruhl being a playwright first and foremost, that it's really, finding a good stage language for taking these things that exist in letter form and sharing them with an audience that maybe wouldn't think to pick up this book or is that more familiar with her work in the theater and wouldn't necessarily think to engage with it in this way. So that's the short version. There's a spoiler that I have refrained from saying in there. We will have a spoiler section coming up soon, but is there anything you'd like to add to just what the play is about before we get into general appraisals of the production?
No, I think you pretty much like summed it up quite nicely there. And also just, yeah, I know this book has been on Ryan's personal bookshelf for quite some time. He's mentioned to me how much he loves it. So it was kind of really fun going to see this play, and you were so excited. I mean, we're always excited to see shows, but this was like I know like a special different one for you. So I just look forward to our conversation kind of unpacking kind of maybe like even some compare and contrast to your experience like with the novel, and then coming into, or the, I guess, it's autobiographical collection of letters.
Yeah, book of letters. Not quite a novel, but
yeah.
It's interesting book versus play here. Yeah.
And then I kind of came in fully blind. Like, again, I know this book's been important to you, and it's kind of been on my radar to want to read, but I didn't get a chance to do that prior to seeing the show last night. So I went in blind. So it'll be cool to kind of see a newbie's experience with it all too.
Mm-hmm. And not completely blind, because during this past month when you were doing a show up in Muskoka, I was periodically text you passages from it that made me cry. So you have little weird snippet experience of it. But yes, not having the coherent whole will obviously change the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think before we just get into spoiler territory, just like general appraisals of it. This is the Canadian premiere of the show too, which I didn't mention at the top of the episode. So that's lovely. And it also just recently premiered this year earlier in New York, right?
February of 2023. And Sarah Ruhl, I don't know if I mentioned this, she wrote the adaptation herself. It's not, actually, which was something that I didn't realize right away when they first announced they were doing this. Necessary Angel doing it here in Toronto at the Theatre Centre. I was kind of under the impression that, this makes sense. That Alan Dilworth has long been a Sarah Ruhl interpreter here in Toronto. So I thought that's cool that he and maybe a few playwright collaborators probably took the book and said, we can make a play out of this. An exchange of letters is kind of like dialogue. So it is dialogue, but it would very translatable to theatrical dialogue. We could easily make a play out of this, but it was only when I did a little more digging that I realized that Sarah herself had already beat him to the punch, and that he was taking the pre-existing play and bringing it to its Toronto premiere.
Yeah, it's great. So it's really like fresh off the press, like a new play, and it's brilliant in my opinion. Also, Maev, Beaty, and Jesse LaVercombe are some of the most brilliant actors on our stages right now, and I actually had the opportunity of seeing them together in Hannah Moskovich's Bunny at Tarragon a couple years back as well. So you can tell like their friendship, their chemistry just as people, as humans, and then backing these characters up with that same compassion and empathy was a delight to watch. So I would say run to see this. I don't say that often, but definitely, I usually am like, yes, go see it regardless. But this, I would say run to see it. We'll get into it beyond spoilers. But I was saying to Ryan the minute we got out, I was like, oh yeah, this play got me in the heartstrings. And I think you knew that I was going to have that experience. But there's just certain pieces of art that just really feels like right place, right time, universe aligning. It's good for the soul as well as for the artist. Yeah, that would be my sort of overall acclaim or like appraisal of it. I don't know if you want to add any.
So I will add my, unfortunately, a little more trepidatious, still high praise, but a little more cautious. And I think I'm going to alienate all of my friends and colleagues in the Association of Adaptation Studies by saying this, but I unfortunately feel that I like the book more than the play. I'm one of those, I guess. I try not to be one of those in my scholastic engagements with adaptation theory and practice. And, we always say, adaptation scholars always say that we don't judge the adaptation by the standard of its fidelity to the original. And while I agree with that in principle, my love for the book, and especially the very recency with which I completed this book that I had been living with for a while on a certain level, I was bawling reading it, and I can't say I had the same viscerally emotional reaction watching it, which troubled me a bit because I was really expecting to and hoping to.
Mm.
And I do think that this is just that familiarity really did shoot me in the foot a little bit and kind of prevented me from opening up to what I was seeing on the stage in this way. The recency of my engagement with it very much had me with a very fresh comparison in my head.
Mm.
And, if there's like a line or a poem from the book that I, really loved, it's a little sad when it's not in there. Or, for example,
Right.
like little things like that I know are very unique to my experience. Even other people who've read the book longer ago won't have that same immediacy with it. And like there's other things that I can get into that made me a little more uncertain about my feelings that I think are better left post spoiler. But I do
Mhm.
think anybody who has not read the book or not read it recently enough will probably have a much more similar reaction to yours than to mine. I'm recognizing that this is very unique to my circumstances.
Right.
And even putting those little feelings aside, this is a stunning production. Brilliant actors, brilliant direction. These people have worked together before and, have come together to make something really beautiful, a tribute to a playwright they obviously have a special fondness for, and an additional poet who, this piece very much is a tribute to. And just these words live very nicely on the page, but there is also something special about lifting them off the page and putting them in
Absolutely.
the
Yep.
voices of these truly brilliant artists. So I will not fault the production for my own interesting relationship to it and the source material and whatnot, but I would feel dishonest if I didn't bring my own feelings and experience into this review of it, because that is
Yeah,
part
yeah,
of
yeah.
my
Of course.
experience.
Of course.
But any more would probably delve into spoilers, so shall we?
Right. We shall. I was going to say too, like the text flying off the page like birds,
Hey.
which is maybe a good segue to spoiler. Yeah. So at this point, we thought it would be appropriate to have a little envelope show up with spoiler written on the front. Just a little letter in
Signed,
passing.
sealed, delivered. Although I tried to lobby for the spoiler icon being a bowl of soup, but you vetoed that, so it'll be a
Because
letter.
technically, inside the letter, they could be talking about the bowl of soup. So,
And statistically speaking, they probably are.
okay, are we in? We're in it.
We are in the spoiler zone,
We
yes.
are inside the spoiler zone, eating our soup and living our lives. Okay. Great. Okay. So let's go. Playground spoiler vibes are
Max
open.
dies. That was the thing that I was reticent about mentioning in the non-spoiler. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking in the book. It's heartbreaking in the show. Yeah, Max passed away in 2016. He did not win his battle against cancer, but so much of the narrative of both the book and the play and the content of their letters is about him grappling with metaphysics, his mortality, the afterlife. People familiar with a lot of Sarah Ruhl's work know that she dabbles with Tibetan Buddhism, especially in her play The Oldest Boy. And she was in the thick of a lot of that writing and research and contemplation when this person came into her life. And they very much did have this playground to discuss these big ideas. And, I do think that this relationship very clearly feels like it was a balm to him in those last years of his life, to have made this beautiful friendship with this person, and for her to really share this exchange of letters with a kindred spirit. And it's just so touching, everything about it. Like, this is, I probably should have said this pre-spoilers because it feels like a pull quote, but this play, and by extension also the book, is just an opportunity for you to spend time with these two wonderful people who have enormous brains and even bigger hearts. And that is what this production can give you.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off of that, like, just kind of going back to Max, like seeing that trajectory, like from the very beginning, that he's battled with this his whole life, and that it's kind of in the back of his brain. I think he's aware that things could turn sour, but like to kind of see through that character, like that going on the back of his head, but he's still going through life milestones. He's going to class, he graduates, he gets a girlfriend, he gets married. And it's like this, you really are just watching this young, because he was only 25. So you hear that age at the end of it too. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is a soul that was took way too soon. And also just packed with wisdom beyond his years, as some people would say. like definitely a special gem. And just to kind of watch him kind of go through life having this wonderful relationship where he can kind of unfold the like caverns of his brain, whether it be about his illness or about his relationship woes or about his mother. And then I mentioned this to you last night, Ryan, when it's kind of obviously shared, the whole production is mostly shared throughout their letters. However, both of them step up to a microphone at different parts when they go into their poetry. So there's poems literally sprinkled in amidst the letters. And it's when he has a poem where, again, audience and characters know, okay, he's probably near the end. And it's packed. Again, I've said to you, it was like, it feels like the 11 o'clock number because it happened like very shortly before the production ended. I think Jesse delivered it like downstage left, but it was like packed with medical jargon, but then also like spiritual utterances. And then, so it wasn't until that moment that I knew I was inside the experience and feeling things on elevated levels, but it was that particular monologue that I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how much I was entrenched in this experience. And not just in this person, just in what this piece does to like humanity. Like it's kind of hard to articulate, but I just was overwhelmed by a myriad of emotions. And it wasn't that I necessarily have gone through cancer or have lost someone. It was just like through their relationship and a reflection of the vocabulary they used, the in-depth poetry to explain a very simple day-to-day thing. It just, so many things were bubbling up inside of me as like Jill, as human, as artist. And then to then bear witness to this character of oh my goodness, this is the end. It almost felt like orgasmic being on this ride with them. I don't know what they're going to say or how they're going to say it, but it's so eloquent or it's so great. And isn't it lovely to just have this open relationship with another human being? It, like you said, platonic, no certain strings attached. And then it was, that monologue that was like, it's going to end. And then the one he quickly has after that to me was like his swan song. Mm-hmm. And it just, again, it was like a bittersweet moment. It was, of course, this is how this is going to end. But it was beautiful. And again, like the way they talk about death and love is so like indescribable and beautiful. And just, I'm rambling, but like this is probably going to be me this whole episode because this piece really does allow you to just open up your heart and soul and mind, and just whatever comes out of your mouth comes out of your mouth.
Yeah, this is a piece that provokes rambles. I don't know if there's any better way to... Yeah, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead.
Like, I don't even know where to begin. It's, yeah, just... I don't know. It feels gauche after all that beautiful stuff you said to start me going into, but all my complicated feelings, and I don't know how.
I mean, no. Add it as an ingredient to the soup.
Like it's.
Sorry, wait. Can we just contextualize the soup thing really quickly?
Yes, sure. Please explain the soup.
Okay, so here's something that. So Ryan went in obviously knowing all like the like certain moments and like cutesy moments that these two share, whereas I was kind of being hit by them first thing by seeing the play, right? Firsthand, the material is all fresh to me. And there was definitely moments in here where I just laughed because I'm like, this is another thing about this piece. It's like, it's about these two people that exist or existed. And it's very much their own lives and their own private or personal relationship. But the topics in which they disclose and unpack covers like at least westernized humanity. Like there were so many different pockets of conversation that I was like, oh, like, I can relate to that, or like, I just said that, or I just referred to that literally yesterday, or there's just so many. Sorry, do you have something?
No, it's funny you said westernized because so much of their conversation also contains Eastern
That's
religion
true.
and mysticism. So it's kind of the entire global gamut being covered here.
I just
Sorry,
mean
continue.
like the like Harry Potter or like Disney references or like stuff that pretty like as like growing up like in Canada, it's relatable to me. I don't know if it would be the same experience to other viewers, but like just like certain things. I think I even shared with Ryan. I randomly saw something on about Hadestown right before we left for this production, and I was in the washroom, albeit of all places, full disclosure, just scrolling through this Hadestown announcement, and I realized they casted a new Orpheus. So I'm just in the washroom singing Orpheus. And then like they happen to, in this play, mention, like refer to Max as being an Orpheus. Or like at time of recording tonight, Ryan and I are randomly attending this Moby Dick lecture later after this recording is done. And what do you know? In the play, they mention Moby Dick. Like it's little things that's like, what did I say was like nonsensical specificity, but like it's the classic thing of when you see something on TV or you read something and you're like, I just talked about that. Or vice versa. You're talking about something and then you see something or read something. Like it's like, to me, I'm not a religious person per se, but I do have spiritual tendencies and
just like Max.
Yeah. And so when I'm in this space like that, like, again, it's nonsensical specificity, but to me, it's like that screams right time, right place. Like the universe is carving this experience out for you. Does it make sense? Maybe not. But again, I think it's beautiful. Like to me, that's what Sarah and Max's relationship kind of is. Like who knows? I mean, the relationship probably would have lasted there beyond, when Max unfortunately perished. But yeah, it's beautiful how this piece, again, which is so specific to these two people, really do paint a giant canvas of life and human.
And I think right place, right time is such an interesting way of putting it, because this, I don't remember if the play said as much about this, but certainly in the book and especially the afterword of the book, like Sarah acknowledges that was her very first semester teaching playwriting when he happened to come into her class. The TA dismissed his application, but she dug it up and found it, and it's kind of a fluke that he even joined the class. Like, things could have been so differently. None of this relationship or book or play could have existed if things just turned out slightly different. It really, all of this has spun out from just the two of these people happening to be in the right place at the right time. So you feeling that as your reception of the piece, encountering their relationship that was only itself the product of this kind of serendipity, feels pretty serendipitous that you are now able to share that with them.
Yeah, and I think it's also just so wonderful to, and I think I've always felt this about two-handers, but especially post-pandemic, which I'll get to like in a second, but the fact that, like how much of a lifetime or a life, and I mean life meaning like discussion and experience and exchange of energy that can really be shared between just two people. Like it really, I mean, and again, it's like as human beings, which now we live in a very individualistic sort of put your blinders on, stay in your lane world. Just, watching like, what does it mean when two bodies are open and present and loving and caring for each other? And to think of how deep and like the caverns of the world can be discussed. I feel like this thought or this meditation of mine I would have regardless, but I think especially because we are spiraling out of a world where we were forced in isolation and refraining from being in community, and now it's, for the most part, we're back to the norm or back to groups and spaces. But it's kind of lovely going back to, what is it when you see two bodies on stage? Almost at a lot of parts of this production seemed like they were socially distancing. Obviously they weren't particularly, it was just the particular staging, but it elevated my mind of like, wow, this is beautiful, because it's still like, as long as if you have that one person if you have that one other entity to share your experiences, to share your triumphs and your trials and get as deep or as surface as you want, like that's a good cup of soup. Yeah.
No, and
So
I
wait,
think,
we never described the soup thing?
oh no, we got
Yeah, sorry,
sidetracked.
I went on a tangent. Okay. So
This play
with
provokes
this
rambles.
so there's a passage, which again I laugh because I'm like, this is so cute. So Sarah Ruhl, like true story, with her husband, she for her 26th birthday, she had a soup party. So she cooked 5 soups. And Ryan, you had said in the book that it was because at a restaurant, it's like if you order 3 soups, that's like
It's
taboo
weird.
or like it's
you can order
weird.
1 soup in a restaurant, but three
Right.
you
So
look
she's
crazy.
like, I want my soup. So I'll just host a birthday party of my own with 5 soups. It was like her 26th birthday party too. And I was like, I feel so seen. But, and then, yeah, that was her husband, Tony, had made this delicious, like curried-esque soup, right? And that was like their first kiss or they fell in love. And I was like, that's adorable. I just love stuff like that. And that, like, I found throughout all of this too, little stories shared and how they're shared. And it really piques you inside of who these people were or are. And it's like, newsflash, we're all like that. It's the classic thing of you don't have to be an artist to have an inner child. Like, and looking around and being in the audience and seeing people wipe the same tear off their face that I just wiped off mine. Mm-hmm. We're way more similar than we are different as humans. Sorry, it's my little singing propaganda there. But yeah, I just thought that moment was so cute. So then, and also a lot of the staging as well, you see when Max and Sarah do get together for like a lunch or a catch up, they are seen eating soup. So the idea
always a bowl pretty close by. And
they
talk a lot about soup. Like they have this whole discussion about, chewing kind of approximates speech, whereas soup allows silence in a way. And, Sarah has this whole theory about, soup distills things to their essence in a way that no other food does. That eating a salad is like singing Gilbert and Sullivan's Modern Major General.
Which, again, funnily enough, we were talking about that song a couple days ago.
We were, weren't we? Yeah.
And that came in. But also with that too, which I thought was really lovely, she mentions that soup are like a amalgamation of ingredients that are mulled down with care by someone too. So it does take time and effort and care and thought to make a soup. So
this play has taken these individual ingredients of letters and turned them into a beautiful soup where they can commingle and be eaten with a spoon.
And which is
or aloud.
a lovely segue. I do think many ingredients of theater were used beautifully to make this piece alive on the stage. Like there's use of projection at certain times. There's multi-layered scrim at the back of the stage. It's done at the theater center's main space. So there's kind of like a proscenium black box-esque vibe going on. The floor was clearly painted with chalkboard paint because there is a moment when Jesse writes on the floor. Again, I've always said this on episodes too, like I'm very excited and titillated when I see a production with minimalist set and props, because it's not that I don't like productions with that, but then I'm like, okay, we really are distilling to relationship and text and the actors. And so, yeah, just having the 2 wooden tables, some wooden chairs, sort of choreographed, staged in a certain way at certain pockets, letters occasionally, bowls of soup occasionally, but for the most part, it really was highlighting these 2 humans. And I thought the use of pivoting between, because like as we've said, this piece is just like their letters. So like when you're staging a production like this, like you don't really have the benefit of a beginning, middle, end, like a chronological. You kind of, again, with Sarah adapting this, like, pivoting from one letter to the next. Obviously there is like a chronological in like the letters dated per se, but like deciding which ones to include and which ones not and how to transition into those, that would definitely take some excavating tools to do that. And then just Alan's direction of how to pivot and why to pivot, I thought was beautifully done. Like the transitionary moments, and even in some of the moments when like Maev or Jesse just needed to move props off stage or move stuff, it never was like, oh, that's an actor just moving that. No, it was like infused with like, this is the transition, or like, this is the sign off of the letter, you know?
Well, and what I think, to speak to one very good example that sort of encapsulates that, because you mentioned earlier they use the microphones when they do their poetry readings, but there was one moment where Maev is bringing the microphone to Jesse in the actual context of a public poetry reading. It's like, I need no microphone. And then she's like, oh, never mind. And so it felt like there was a very spontaneous feeling to, you know, how these were moving. And yeah, like you're absolutely right. It always felt like it was in character. It was never flick off my actor brain because now I have to be an SM or ASM to move this into the space. Yeah.
Definitely. And there was such like, again, there's the specific choreo bird moments that Max does at the very beginning, and then to bookend us, Sarah does at the end, which was brilliant. And our choreographer, I want to shout them out.
Monica Dattore. I hope we're pronouncing that right. I pronounced it multiple ways, so one of them might be right. Apologies if it's not.
But Monica, just chef's kiss. I mean, with the bird choreography in particular, like how to go through, like how to create a physical piece that is a universal bird, but also being like a human soul, and also being a living human, and also showing the release and tension that you share with yourself and that you have with the world, and like a fully functioning wing versus like a broken wing. Like all of these things were coming to mind. I was like,
and that, you know what, that really probably means a lot coming from you, because you have a lot of experience playing a variety of birds recently.
True.
In Pin Pin the Explorer, where you played multiple different birds at Red Sandcastle earlier this year. So yeah, you are the expert in bird choreography, I would say.
But even so, like bird experience or not, it just was really stunning. And having Max do it, and then having Sarah like mirror exactly that at the end was a wonderful, again, use of like repetition. Yeah, I think that the theatrical devices in this were definitely well executed and also beautifully sewn together for all audiences. Like, and I'll unpack that using specific examples. Like, I think you and I, obviously being artists or being in the industry, there's moments where we're like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. Or what a great mechanical usage to get that thought across. But again, looking around and being in a space with everyone that was there who, you know, most of the audience is probably not an industry professional, because also we attended the performance right after opening as well. But like I said, like seeing us all wipe the same tear. Like there's the moment where I think you just kind of subtly mentioned it, Ryan, and we were talking about it through transitions. And there's a literal passage or a letter where they talk about, I think it was Sarah talking about using Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and how there's, through that movement, through that piece of art, there's silent moments that are like brilliant triumphs, but the audience is sort of aware enough to not disrupt a moment by clapping or cheering. There's just this understanding of
the silence between movements.
Yes, the silence between movements. Exactly. And then in that same letter, like Sarah says, like that's what she thinks death kind of is. And when the last bit of Max we get on stage, and then Jesse eventually collapses himself into like this sort of, like it kind of looks like a maimed bird on this lounge chair, and Maev sits there, with glassy eyes, and is looking out at the audience, and is just has us sit there for like a good, what felt like a minute. Yeah. And it was just this understanding of like, again, you don't need to know or like even been paying attention. It's just like this innate human experience or like relatability. And it was just like, it's a classic thing of like the beat, like from a practical point of view, that was held. It no longer was like a theatrical beat. It was like a weighted beat. And then again, marrying it to what the text had just said. And yeah, we sat in silence. And that was the, for lack of a better word, the nail in the coffin. Like Max had died. I feel like that was a very mechanical way of describing such a beautiful moment, but like
I think I'm so glad you brought it like back to the Vivaldi and the silence between movements. That sitting in that silence really does just it really gets you. We all know what happened after a good 5 seconds. It's very clear that he's not getting up. We can see what her reaction on her face means, but they make us sit in it, really think about it. And because so much of this relationship has been mediated by letters, literally speech, long sprawling paragraphs of contemplating life and mortality and art and poetry, to just let us have that silence. In one of Max's letters, especially near the end, he talks about how he has a habit of interrupting people. His mind is moving too fast that he just wants to say, maybe he just likes the sound of his own voice. But then I don't think there's any better way to memorialize him than just not instantly interrupting his death, that we just allow ourselves to, there is a silence now because this person can no longer speak, or the extent of his speech can now only exist in what he wrote, that we can revisit and we can put it in the mouth of a brilliant actor like Jesse so we can hear it again, but this man will never speak again. And what a loss to the world that is.
Well, and also just like going back to as the many multi-layered emotions I felt watching this show as a spiritual person, but also as like an actor myself. Like there's a class that a lot of people who do theater training take called Zone of Silence, where you actually learn to fight against like jumping on impulse. And it is about like when you find those silent moments and then you don't speak or you don't move unless you instinctually, intentionally find the purpose to speak and find the purpose to move. And it's actually quite difficult as the actor. You're like, oh, I've got this. But then you're like, oh, no, in a medium where you're constantly like drive the text or keep relationship going, we forget to bake in those very human moments of what happens when there are no words, when there's no words left, or you don't have words, or your body is tense, or your body stays still and doesn't want to move. It's immovable. And it's, to me, like a Zone of Silence was like, oh, right, this is us adding the layer of humanhood back to our art. And that moment too, again, just like sharing as artists, absorbing that moment was like, that is a masterclass of Zone of Silence. But in the same breath, all it is just a human understanding. Like that moment is, like it's effortlessly beautiful. And I think there's many other devices that were used in this too. Like I know Ryan, you and I shared about like the scrim usage and how it wasn't just one scrim at the back. There was multi-layered. It looked like there was almost like 2 layered scrims. And then there was the screen. So anytime projections were on the screen, and the projections were infrequent, but like there was one kind of like staircase leading up to like an afterlife, or there was like a passage that was posted, which is brilliant. You probably know the specific words, but anyways, this sort of multi-layered screen effect at the back of the theater, and it constantly was like a reminder of like there's always more, or like the various letters, or even when Max dies, he's in between the 2 scrims. So now that's like this multi-layered step process. And now talking back to like Eastern religions of like, you go through multiple life cycles and there until you reach nirvana. Like there's just like, again, the usage of theatrical devices in this, I think were stunning. Also, even like the costumes, like this is exactly what we wore last night. And I was like, let's put on the same things today because ironically, I came in this like sort of earthy, watery plaid. And then Ryan's wearing this, like basic beige. But both characters were kind of had those same hues going on. Like Maev's costume was sort of like green and really I got like a nice, like an earthy, grounded presence from her. And then you could see that exteriorly in her costume. Like she had like a cozy sort of like army green cardigan. And then like it almost looked like a little flower pattern or like, and again, it instantly was like, oh, that just exudes someone who's like grounded. And then Maev speaking the speech is you could listen to for eons is so eloquent and juicy and just made me want to like curl up in front of a fire with a cup of coffee, like just her costume. And then honestly, in comparison, Max had like kind of the same color as this shirt, but like striped over top of like a white t-shirt and then like a little like green sort of neck warmer. And again, the palette almost like being like watery, but also earth as well. So like these people are so similar, but like different. And his pattern being more like the striped, like a bit more of the starked, like sort of like pungent one of the two, more eccentric rather. And obviously you see in the restaurant scene when Sarah gets a little bit embarrassed by him standing up and saying a poem. And then I just thought too, like the neck warmer, this is also just quite getting into like what my brain made of that. It was like the same color as Maev's cardigan. And also seeing him wear that before I even like knew he was sick or disclosed that, protecting your neck, especially like being a singer, or when you're like cold, right? Or like you protect your neck when it's cold out or when you're sick. So having that kind of like cover his moneymaker, his voice, his voice box in a way, and then being like the same color as Maev's cardigan was also just like this reminder. Yeah. Again, that's just like a very specific close reading of
it's
one
great.
particular article of costume.
I can't say I specifically noticed that, but I think that's great. Like Max's entire costume and costume changes are like very interesting because on one hand, like the neck warmer scarf, it just screams, I am a bohemian, I'm a poet, I'm an artist. But knowing his illness, it kind of gets colored by this probably more functional need of, your skin and bones you need to keep warm. You're not, your body is not healthy enough to do that for you. And of course, I love, it was only on stage for a very brief moment, but I love that we got to see Max's pink kimono because that is mentioned prominently in the book, describing that. And I was, reading the book. I'm like, there's no way they're not going to have this on stage. And sure enough, they did. So it is nice to be embodied in that way. Yeah. Who was the costume designer? That deserves a shout out. All of this that we've been talking about. Stand by.
Designer is
set props costumes were all Michelle Tracy.
Correct.
So, very good job. So can we go just dial back a little bit to something? Because you mentioned like the projections, the stage effects. We've heaped on a lot of praise. I hope it's very clear that we loved a lot of things, but I did mention how I have mixed feelings, and if I could maybe use this
of course.
One as a sort of jumping off point for at least one of the things that I was a little disappointed, feels like the wrong word about, but left unsure of. So back it up a bit. Sarah Ruhl loves letters. That's funny. But like part of why I even picked up this book in the first place a while back before it was ever announced that this was a play that was happening is, well, just, speaking of myself, a lot of my research scholastically concerns life writing and theater and adapting life writing sources, and letters is part of that. I had a botched dissertation chapter that was supposed to be all about staging letters that I still want to return to at some point, but it doesn't belong in the dissertation anymore. And one of the case studies from that was another Sarah Ruhl play, Dear Elizabeth, which is mentioned in both this book and this play, that it was a piece that she adapted from this big volume of letters between the poets Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell. And it's another lovely story of a friendship blossoming between these two people, told entirely in their own words. And, I think this play is very interesting. Part of my, gravitation towards it is just that Sarah Ruhl loves letters. It comes up throughout so much of her work. Even one of her earliest and most famous plays, Eurydice, speaking of Orpheus, is, that's a motif in it, that the characters send physical letters to and from the afterlife. And, it's just what a beautiful way of, conceptualizing wanting to commune with the dead and maybe not receiving the response you want. And another one of her early plays, Dead Man's Cell Phone, uses the actual technology of a cell phone in a very similar way too, that you have this thing that belonged to a dead person and it feels like a very one-sided communication, but opens up this bridge to, his family and his life. Not a review of that show, so we don't need to get into it, but then there's also this beautiful paper ballet that happens in that piece. Like, I think there's a common reading of that piece that is like, technology bad, cell phones bad, we should write letters. But I see the piece as being very much a celebration of the technologies with which we try and sometimes fail to communicate with each other. Cell phones being one, letters being one, is just an analog versus more high tech. And I think so much of these, what are called letters and letters for Max, were emails or even texts sent between each other, but it's all letters because letters is the technology with which we communicate. So, and then of course, so we get to Dear Elizabeth in her sort of span of plays here. And that's an interesting one because it is, and sorry, I know I prefaced this with talking about those projections and I'm getting there, so bear with me. But
it's okay.
Dear Elizabeth is very interesting because it kind of is Sarah Ruhl's attempt at doing essentially the play Love Letters by A.R. Gurney, or any number of other similar plays that are just, these are characters writing letters back and forth to each other, and we can see the story unfold in that way, like an epistolary novel, like Samuel Richardson. And, the big difference between Gurney's Love Letters and Ruhl's Dear Elizabeth is that in Love Letters, he invented these two characters, purely fictional, to tell their story together. And in Dear Elizabeth, she had the document, the big book of letters, and she just felt like these needed to be put into actors' mouths. We needed to hear them on stage. And yet what I think is most charming and beautiful about Dear Elizabeth, and the thing that elevates it above a play like Love Letters, which I also think is great for different reasons, but is very, in its staging, constantly bare bones, usually letters on music stands. The actors are usually told in productions of that to not even memorize the letters. I want you to read them aloud. Dear Elizabeth is filled with some of the beautiful, abstract, surreal, often staging devices and stage imageries and impossible stage directions that characterize so much of Ruhl's writing, and her playwriting, obviously, in particular. That like she's taken these letters between these two poets who speak with poetic imagery and found ways to be like, there's a beautiful image, I want to see that on stage. So in one of the letters, Robert Lowell talks about wanting to climb a ladder and touch the moon. So when we get to that letter in the play, they actually put a ladder on stage and a big moon comes down and he climbs up and tries to reach for it. And the scholar Amy Muse, who wrote a very good book, Close Reading, all of Sarah Ruhl's plays up to a certain point, pointed out something about that sort of was similar to my own experience of it, but put it into words very nicely. And she said, I'm paraphrasing here, but she said that even though this is a play where none of the dialogue was written by Ruhl herself, she managed to find a way to make it feel like a Sarah Ruhl play. And I think that just encapsulates that perfectly as a description for Dear Elizabeth, because by including all of these staging things that really do feel like something right out of Eurydice or Dead Man's Cell Phone or any number of her other plays, it feels like a Sarah Ruhl play in that way. Letters from Max, the stage version, to me didn't quite feel like a Sarah Ruhl play, which is puzzling because it's unlike Dear Elizabeth. Half of the words were written by her and they're in her voice, and I've read them in her voice. And when I look at things like the projections on the scrim, that little staircase that we saw a couple times, and the skeleton when Max is reading his poem about who wants to cuddle a skeleton, a line that I found relatable for reasons, I see gestures towards that idea of it's Sarah Ruhl, it's kind of surreal, we're breaking the realist form here, but I don't think there was enough of that to really justify it, and kind of, like, I know you said that you love the minimalism of this piece, and I generally love minimalism too, but I think this was an opportunity to give Sarah's own letters to Max and vice versa the same treatment that she gave to Bishop's letters to Lowell. I don't know, and that kind of, and like, I'm a very easy lay for using chalk on the floor and walls of a theater. Like, that is a big, scratch my itch for me. And they did it once in a very potent moment, the writing, there is no God, while recounting the letter from her father about, well, then who wrote that exactly? And I wanted, you already have the chalk, you already have the well-cleaned floors and walls, use chalk throughout the play. I'd love to see more of that. It just, it felt like there was, there was almost like holding back too much from allowing this to be a Sarah Ruhl play, which is funny because she wrote the adaptation. Anyway,
I wonder if I may take a page out of your book and throw a wrench.
Please do.
Now that you're unpacking this, I wonder if it's purposefully not pushing the theatrical boundaries too much to pay homage to the privacy of this exchange originally being via letters and emails as opposed to being a play first. Like, I wonder if there was hesitation, or I don't know if reticence is the right word, but like to go too theatrical. Because I kind of agree with what you're saying. Like, it would be interesting to get a bit more like poignant images on that back scrim. But I wonder, like, I think if you go a step too far with the chalk or too far with the projections, then it peels away from just the like rawness that the humans on stage are exchanging.
Yeah.
Because I'm okay with it not being like, just because it's a play adaptation by Sarah Ruhl, I'm okay with it not being a Sarah Ruhl play, if that makes sense.
No, and I think that's an apt way of putting it.
Yeah. Because I think there is some private, the fact that like this relationship, honestly, a lot of people may not even understand, first off, how can a male and a female just have a platonic relationship? Or like, how can a previous student and teacher have like, there's so many like obstacles and hurdles, and then let alone the content in which they're talking about, but then also the depth and artistic way in which they're talking. Like, there's so many hurdles and obstacles that people probably wouldn't have understood between these two humans, unfortunately. But then the fact that this exchange was so beautiful and needed, and definitely a place of comfort and drive, especially for Max, who's literally dying the minute they meet. I mean, we all are dying, but death is a bit more tangible for Max. I think that relationship could have stayed private, but the fact that it was made into a book agreeably and consensually and beautifully
and they
woven together
to make a book of it even before he died. It was,
exactly.
And
then
a breach of his confidence that she took his
no,
letters
of course, of course. But then and then they make it into a play as well. I think it's like, it's wonderful that we are exposed either through the book form or the play form to this relationship, but I wouldn't want to invade it too much.
I think that's fair.
Like, I even like, and again, there was part of me that was like, oh, when Sarah says that it's when one of Max's final poem readings, when he's sitting on the chair, and she says, he recites it to a room that is fully lit. So instantly I'm like, oh, this is great. The house lights are going to come fully on. Like, this is going to be great. But then they didn't. They gradually got brighter. And I noticed you noticed this too. They gradually got brighter, but it was still a hummed light. Like, it wasn't the lights are on. Like, it wasn't the literal thing what she was saying. And again, to me, I was like, at first I was like, oh, and then I was like, oh, I really like that, because we're just bearing witness to their relationship. Like, it's not putting it on full display.
I agree. And I think, again, certainly that moment, I don't fault. Yeah, I think that was the right amount of house light to illuminate there. Yeah, like, No, sorry, finish your thought.
No, I was just saying, even like the lighting, like change, there, it didn't go as far as using go-gos. It was just
No.
like a light change, or like when Max recites the poem about the color purple, the light goes purple, but it's not like purple and there's an image on the stage, or like, or like, when they talk about the seasons or her on the train, it's not like the lights are shifting. Like,
Yeah.
I think the tastefulness and like subtlety of the theatrical devices worked for me. I see where you're coming from. And I think it could have maybe been pushed a little bit more, but again, like I wouldn't want to see the whole floor and walls covered in chalk.
Okay.
I think then that changes.
Hmm.
It just feels like theater is now invading this relationship.
Well, and I guess why I probably have more problems with it than you do on these grounds is because, it goes back to the thing I said at the beginning of, I feel like the book is better, the thing that's gonna, excommunicate me from the Association of Adaptation Studies. But
Dramatic much?
Yeah, very dramatic. But in the absence of these very theatrical devices, kind of, as you put it, invading it with theater, I feel like I got very little from seeing the performance that I didn't already get from reading the book. And if it's just going to be a very talented, dramatic reading of a shorter version of this book, I was hoping there would be more theatricality to justify its transposition into theater, that it would be giving something special for people like me who not only have read the book, but have the book fresh in their head, that justifies not just staying home with a cup of tea and reading the book, but actually sharing this ritual, this communal experience of co-presence and liveness, of, utilizing the medium to its full potential, because that's what justifies the taking it out of one medium and putting it into the other. I think this was another thought that I had, because part of me wondered when I first saw the announcement of this play, and originally thought that it was Alan Dilworth himself adapting the book to the stage, but then learning that Sarah adapted the book herself. Part of me wondered, like, why didn't, especially now knowing that she did it herself, why didn't she just make it a play first? Why, she's a playwright first and foremost. And I kind of have all sorts of different theories and reasons, and I think the most probably obvious one is that she knew she couldn't contain the breadth of the letters, the breadth of their relationship in a 2-hour play. Although with the nods to Einstein on the Beach mentioned here, perhaps this could have benefited from being a more sprawling 4-hour epic. I don't know. Just saying.
Huge Einstein on the Beach fan. That's also something that's mentioned. And I was like, this play.
But I think part of like my main understanding for why, I don't know if she necessarily intended to make a play out of it, or the success of the book kind of inspired her that, yes, this could also be a play. But I feel like the book, if she did intend to make a play all along, I think the book provides an archive, a document that she could adapt from, just like she had the book, I believe it's called Words in Air, which is the book of letters between Bishop and Lowell, that it's something more tangible that pre-exists in the world, that, like, it's recognizing that the play will only give you so much, but you can read the original and you can see that. And I don't know, but I think the other big reason that, and like, I don't falter for that. Yes, the 2 hours traffic of our stage is a very, tried and true framework for a stage play. But I think the other big reason for doing it as a play is something I did want to talk about, the change of subtitle, because the subtitle of the book, which I have right here, in case you didn't realize, is A Book of Friendship. Lovely subtitle. Letters from Max, A Book of Friendship. The subtitle for the play is Letters from Max, A Ritual. And ritual and ritualistic elements come up throughout the book, throughout their discussions, throughout the interstitial narrations where Sarah meditates on their discussions. And the ritual of letter writing is huge. But I think the fact that very deliberately chosen that the play is signified as a ritual is really talking about the ritual of theater going, of theater performing, the shared ritual. And yeah, I think this is another, it goes back to Amy Muse, who, in addition to making that very cogent point about Dear Elizabeth also has a whole chapter in that book devoted to the prominence of ritual in Sarah Ruhl's work as a guiding theme that can sort of unlock our understanding of her work. And to know that Sarah Ruhl herself adapted this play, decided to call it a ritual. Again, it feels like her least ritualistic work in a way, or the one that is least, I don't want to say deserving of the subtitle of a ritual, but set me up for an expectation of a ritual that didn't feel like it actually paid off.
But it's interesting in the conversation we were having in the car last night, which we don't have to get so far in, but maybe it's a ritual for her. Like that's where, like, again, we've talked about like the separation of what interests you and what calls you, but then actively what you decide to work on or what you are interested in, or more often than not, opposites, very different. Or we choose to explore things that question us, that puzzle us, but have like practical ways to uncover, and then we absorb things that just make us feel emotional or make us, again, I'm trying to paraphrase our conversation, but not getting too far into it. But like with maybe, again, this being probably her most like vulnerable, like, personal piece, like that subtitle change might be for her. Like this was a ritual for her. And it's different because it is different. This is, she's, as the artist, as the playwright, as the professor, she's kind of not leveling up, but like passing a little bit of the, like, as artists, as writers, of anybody artistically, like there is a level of vulnerability you sort of like ghost sign a waiver to, because it's your job to expose yourself on elevated emotions and explore and play and, dissociate your own human self from that sometimes. But with this play, especially this play being autobiographical to her in a sense,
very much,
and the fact that it was something daily tethering her to her as Sarah Ruhl, but also her as Sarah Ruhl the artist, and to have that it almost reminds me of like like you can get those calendars that have like a daily message every time you turn it over. Yeah, like maybe this is there's a ritual for her. And again, by her sort of transcending, it's like vulnerable on blast, because she's being vulnerable as the writer, as the playwright, but then now she's bleeding. She's allowing her personal life, her human life, to bleed into her work as well. Which, like, to be honest, doesn't happen often with us actors. If you want it to, obviously anything autobiographical or personal, but a lot of the times, even as actors, as writers, when we endow, sure, we're thinking of experiences that we have or moments that we've gone through, but then we're still placing it inside of a cavern of a different character or a different situation. It's like we're the paste on making like paper mache. Do you know what I mean? Whereas with, I don't know if that made any sense, but sure. Whereas, once you step into the autobiographical sense, or even doing like a one-person show or whatever, you're kind of signing yourself up to tango differently and more vulnerably, because you're allowing your human self to come in as well. So I don't know, this is a rambly thing, but I think I would argue it's a ritual for her.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's where that subtitle first and foremost comes from. I like what you're saying about the vulnerability of it all, that yes, this is certainly her most autobiographical work, and you can read autobiographical elements into the more fictionalized versions of her play. I think, I'm certainly not the first to point out that Eurydice was a way for her to cope with the grief of losing her own father. Very common reading. But yes, this is the only play where we have a character named Sarah Ruhl on stage.
Yeah.
And I think this comes up in the book a few times about the difference between being a playwright and being a poet, and the public versus the private, but theater being a public art, yet as the playwright you can hide behind the actors, and in a way that poetry can't. You're speaking with the lyric eye versus the dramatic eye. And I want to just, I know this is going very long, so we can probably end soon, but I do want to say one great passage in here that I think speaks to what you're saying. It's on page 28 of the book, if anyone's following along at home.
Oh my goodness.
And it did come up in the play too. It's poetry advice that Sarah gives Max early on when there still sort of is this student-teacher relationship before they really become fully just friends. Resist opacity. And I will just keep the quote entirely to that. Don't need to read further. But this is a play that, much like what Sarah wanted Max to do with his poetry, resists the opacity and puts it all on the table so that she can have that ritual for herself and do her best to share that ritual with us.
Yeah. And hearkening back to, like you said, theater is a ritual sense, and because it was formed into the theatrical medium, we are now able to share with them or share that experience through that medium as well.
Yeah. So I guess before we sign off, people should see this play. Even with
we could talk about this for like days.
Yes, even with all of my weird relationship nitpicky things about other Sarah Ruhl works, things about this work in particular, the book, adaptation, etc., etc. See this play. It is an amazing performance that brings all of these things to the surface. And after, not before, after you see the play, read the book, because it will just enhance your experience. Yes,
I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it, and I'm really excited. I'm also excited. I'll probably read the copy that Ryan has ticky marks in. So I'll also take it in myself, but then have like a previous reader's favorite passages noted. So that might add another element to my experience.
It's also, I was telling you this before, that because like I woke up a little early this morning before you did to kind of thumb through the book to try to find maybe a few choice passages like the one I just mentioned that I thought I might want to bring up here in this discussion. And got a little carried away. If anyone watching on screen, you could see the post-it notes I put in here. Obviously, this was far too many to bring up in this discussion.
But they're color-coded, and they all have their own category, which love it.
Yes.
Page manager energy in me is like, yes, we love that.
Clearly, even, again, with all the things that I was unsure about, I'm not done thinking about this play. I'm going to probably continue writing about this play. I know I am, but that's a story for another day.
Nice. Before we sign off, I just want to say there's a really cute moment where Sarah is talking at Max's wedding and says a little poem passage about books and being like, everyone is their own book and you have to be able to read your own book, and then you find another book in life, and because you learn to read your own, you can read theirs. And I just want to say, Ryan is my book, and I love you a lot.
You're my book, and I love you a lot.
Because we're dating, in case anyone watching or listening to this doesn't know by now. But yeah, you're my book, and
you're my book.
I love you.
I love you.
And on that note, emotions are flowing, and get on that emotional train and go see the show. So again, this is Letters from Max, a Ritual. It is a Necessary Angel theater production happening at the Theater Center from now until December 3rd, 2023. Keep your eyes peeled to Necessary Angel's Instas, because I think they just recently posted like a promo arts worker or student ticket price too. But as per usual, we will pop ticket link down below. So on that note, Ryan, where can people find and follow you?
There's usually no need to find and follow me personally, although if I said anything contentious in here and that you want to disagree with me about, I'd rather you send that to me than to Cup of Hemlock. I'm probably the first and only Ryan Borochovitz to ever exist in history. It's a very Irish first name with a very Jewish last name. But so yes, I'm easy to find on social media if you choose to seek me out, but otherwise just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock. It's at COH Theater on Facebook, Twitter, I'm not calling it the other thing, and Instagram. We're Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube, where you're maybe watching this, or the Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast and all the podcast places where you're maybe listening to this. Like, share, subscribe, you know the deal. How about you? Where can people find and follow you?
Yes, people can find and follow me at my artist Instagram account, Jillian.Robinson96. Yeah, you'll see some covers of songs, some previous postings of shows that I had the privilege of being in recently, and see any upcoming projects posted there as well.
Exciting.
So on that note, cheers, stay well. It is sniffle season, so do stay well. Write letters to your loved ones, even if it's just a text or an email.
Yeah. In fact, with this, we could say this post spoiler.
Sure.
That in the lobby, it's very cute. They have these little papers. I swiped just like a blank one to use as a visual aid in this review.
Right.
Where you can write like a letter, put it in an envelope, put that envelope in a box, address it, and they will send it to your loved one who you chose to write to. So get to the show early so you have time to do that, because it's very fun and engages with the themes in an interactive way.
Definitely an interactive pre-show activity.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So write letters, love, laugh, talk about big things, and we'll see you next time.